All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining the African American Historical Society of Rockland County for our annual event. This meeting is in accordance with our bylaws. Tonight's gathering serves as our official year-end review. And we hope you will indulge us as we reflect just a bit on the work that we've carried on throughout 2025 and talk about the importance of our mission, which is to preserve the history of the Black experience in Rockland County, New York. We're looking forward to welcoming our keynote speaker this evening, whose scholarship in New York 19th century free Black communities offers a powerful lens through which to consider our own local histories of resilience and of resistance and community building. Given her work on Black community formation in Brooklyn, some of what I will share tonight will truly resonate and make that presentation hopefully resonate with you. She will also be discussing her work in preserving the history and in partnering with communities to understand, to safeguard, and to protect the histories embedded within their own neighborhoods and family archives. Our conversation will further explore the importance of community archiving and memory work, offering ideas for how Rockland County history keepers and community members can preserve and share stories of Black life across the generations. But as we begin, I want to pause just for a moment to acknowledge an important moment in American history. This week marks the anniversary of the ratification of the 13th Amendment on December 6, 1865, which abolished slavery in the United States and marked a transformative step towards civil rights. Yet, we must also recognize the amendment's profound flaw, the exception clause, which permitted involuntary servitude and punishment for a crime and laid the foundation for systems like convict leasing and later mass incarceration. Tonight, though we are honoring history, we don't want to forget our um, our purpose here, that we're still fighting for social justice and equal rights. Um, and we want to continue the preservation, the truth telling, and make sure that our community memory here in Rockland is never forgotten and honored. I hope that everyone had a chance to use the QR code as well and will follow it to the form. There is also a link in the chat. This is your opportunity to not only test your knowledge about our shared history between Rockland and Brooklyn, but it's also an opportunity to be put in a drawing for Brooklynites. And so you certainly don't want to miss that. All right. I want to acknowledge the AAHS Board of Directors. The trustees are as follows: the Honorable Dana Stilley, who is treasurer, Holly Zuber Banks, Bill Batson, Dr. Claude Brathwaite, the Honorable Tony Earl, Drusilla Kinzonzi, Kenneth Jackson, James Johnson, Dr. Elias Rodriguez, who's secretary, Willie Trotman, Barbara Williams, and Dr. Arlene Klinkscale. Thank you for your service and your unwavering commitment to preserving and sharing Rockland County's Black history. So let's talk about our year in review. This year has been one of growth, community engagement, and deeper commitment to our mission. Our programs and our partnerships have strengthened public understanding of Black history across Rockland County. In February, in February, we hosted a program in partnership with the Finkelstein Memorial Library for Black History Month, which highlighted Frederick Douglass and his deep ties to February. His visits to Nyack from 1865 to 1879, and his lasting influence on movements for justice. In June, we were honored to host Dr. Deborah Plant for Juneteenth. We commemorated Juneteenth with a virtual keynote. We talked about Africa Town and Zora Neale Hurston's work through Barracoon, the story of the last Black cargo. Dr. Plant emphasized storytelling and cultural memory as essential tools for recovering truth and honoring identity. Also in June, we hosted an event with Historic Hilburn. It was a community gathering at Brook Church where we met with residents and descendants, shared photographs, documents, and oral histories. These contributions continue to shape our archive of Hilburn's African American and Indigenous histories. Along with that, we continue to grow our historic Hilburn Hub. This hub is available at hilburn.aahsofrockland.org, which documents Hilburn's layered heritage from the early settlement and community life to the landmark 1943 desegregation case with Thurgood Marshall. The hub is becoming a vital resource tool for researchers and educators and descendants as well as local families. In October at Rockland Community College, we hosted the Underestimated. It was a wonderful descendants panel, those who had relatives who were at the Brooks School and were Brooks School students during the desegregation case. And it featured Dr. Peter Alexander, Rockland historian Craig Long, educators Travis Jackson and Peyton Powell, and was moderated by Dr. Elias Rodriguez. Their reflections highlighted why preserving family archives are essential to our understanding. Everything that we have really learned about um,
Jamila,
Hilburn.
you need to move the slide.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Everything that we have, everything that we have discussed with those families at this point has been because of the families of Hilburn and because of the photos and the archives, the church programs that they have allowed us to use.
Going to be made over the course.
I think we need to mute someone.
Done.
Thank you. All right. So there's one thing that I want to tell you about that has been a project that we've just recently launched, and it was inspired by our work on the historic Hilburn project. But before I get into that and close on the review, I wanted to just share a bit more about what we're planning to launch. Across all of this work, we have continued developing the Rockland County Black Historical Communities Collaborative. It's a countywide effort that we launched in 2025 to document and connect the stories of historic Black communities, including Hilburn, Skunk Hollow, Sparkill, Piermont, the Mine Hole, Nyack, Haverstraw, and Spring Valley, just to name a few. This work is ongoing, it's growing, and it is essential. We'll be launching our website shortly for that, which will have a community forum there where you can contact us and let us know if you'd like to participate, if you'd like to volunteer. Perhaps you have photos or memorabilia, documents within your own family that you would like to share with us and have those digitized. We'll be having community meetings around Rockland about it. You'll get more information via email in newsletters and email correspondence, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about it today. But I also want to share a little brief story with you to drive home why this work is so important. And so, in preparing with for this meeting and the discussion that we're going to have really shortly about the Brooklynites, I was searching for some additional information to kind of support the reasons why we're doing this work. And I ran across, I'm sorry. Well, I guess I'm not able to find it. I ran across a very interesting portrait. I'm so sorry. I ran across a very interesting portrait of that was supposed to be of a Brooklyn mother and her two daughters. And it's from the 19th century. It was supposed to be about a family who was really involved in politics in their own community, not politics per se, but civil rights, social justice. These women were said to be Black migrants from the South, and they were seeking a better life in Brooklyn. The mother had experienced slavery, but she was involved in community building and resilience and resistance. And they created some kind of secret code that only the insiders in the community knew. So that they could support one another, whether it was about housing or jobs or healthcare. This story that I found online on YouTube was beautifully packaged and beautifully put together. Had thousands of people had commented on it and had talked about how beautiful the image was and how this story resonated with them so much. The video listed scholars from Columbia, museums in New York, the New York Times. And I thought, how on earth did I miss this important discovery of this photo that had been given to the New York Historical Society from a family member who had inherited some documents and photos from a grandparent? How could I have missed this exhibition? And so I started to dig further and I couldn't find anything that was relevant to, there was no exhibit, there was no article, there were no scholars at Columbia by that name. The whole thing ended up being a hoax. But there is a button on the YouTube uh, channel on the video where you can donate money. And so what I discovered from this is that there are people out here that are there are people out here who are against Black history being taught in schools. But there are also people who are trying to profit by making up history that really doesn't exist. And that is just as concerning as those who are trying to stop us from telling the truth. And so um, there are only a few people within these thousands of people who had clicked like on this video who also dug a little deeper and found out that it was not a true video. It was not a true historical circumstance, I should say. Most people believed it. And for me, that's really concerning. This is what misinformation does. It spreads quickly, it feels true, and it threatens to overshadow the real histories of Black families and communities. And that brings me to why family archiving is so important. Our families have always been the first historians. Every photograph, every letter, every church program, every clipping carries a story about who we are and what we've built. These everyday acts of preservation, labeling photographs, writing down names, scanning albums, talking to elders, are more than memory. They're a form of resistance, a declaration that our lives and our histories really matter. So I really want to ask you for your assistance in this work that we are doing because we cannot do it alone. It is an expensive venture to try to talk to community members, to host meetings, to get the equipment that is needed, to digitize the beautiful items, the memorabilia, the photos that family members have. And so I want to ask you to please support us in the work that we do by becoming a member. I'm not going to go on and on about this. I'm going to turn this over to one of my colleagues, my board member, Drusilla Kinzonzi, who will talk to us about membership and how you can support our work.
Good evening, everyone. Well, the African American Historical Society of Rockland County is dedicated to educating the public on the historical, cultural, and social experiences of the African diaspora in our region. So, yes, this is an invitation for you to join us in preserving and promoting the rich history of people of African descent in Rockland County and the Lower Hudson Valley. Now, your membership can help us in a number of ways. It helps to support research, public programming, heritage site identification, and digital expansion. Your contribution also supports the Rockland County Black Historical Communities Collaborative, which our president just shared with you, which will allow us to gather descendant stories, digitize family materials, and develop a robust online hub for this multi-year project. So together, we can uncover untold stories and bring engaging programs to our community. Now, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So our membership is as follows. $25 is the general membership. $10 is for senior citizens like myself, and $15 for our youth. And to join as a new member or even to renew your membership, and we thank you if you have been a member with us over the years. To renew your membership or to join anew, we have three options. Number one, you can use your cell phone to capture the QR code that's displayed on the screen. Two, you can click on the direct link that's posted in the chat. And thirdly, you can, of course, send your membership through postal mail. And you will send that to African American Historical Society, P.O. Box 652, Pomona, New York, 10970. And that will be posted in the chat as well. So join today. Help us safeguard this vital history for future generations. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing all of you somewhere on our membership list. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Drusilla. Appreciate that. And if the link is not in the chat as yet, we'll be dropping it in sometime shortly, and you can follow that link to our website where you can donate. Thank you for helping us to continue to do this work. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Elias Rodriguez. Elias is a board member of the African American Historical Society. He's also an assistant professor of English at Sarah Lawrence College. His scholarship centers on African American literature and histories of liberation and resistance. He is also the secretary of our board, and he is going to moderate our conversation. So thank you, Elias, and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Jamila, and thank you everyone for being here, and good evening. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Dr. Prithi Kanakamedala, but before I do so, I just want to remind you all that this is this works best when you think of questions, right? So I'm about to introduce our speaker, and I just ask that you try to think of some questions as they're talking, things that might come to mind that you'd like to hear more about, and you can always feel free to drop those questions in the chat, as we will have a robust and hopefully lively Q&A session after. Now, allow me to introduce Dr. Prithi Kanakamedala. She is professor of history at Bronx Community College, where she teaches undergraduate courses in U.S. history, African American history, and the history of New York City. At the CUNY Grad Center, she is a faculty member of the Master's in Liberal Studies program. She is also author of the book Brooklynites, The Remarkable Story of the Free Black Communities That Shaped a Borough, finalist for the 2025 Gotham Book Prize, and longlisted for the 2025 Brooklyn Public Library Book Prize. She is also co-editor of the collection The City Amplified, Oral Histories and Radical Archives. As a public historian, active for just under 2 decades, she has worked with a range of cultural organizations in New York City, including Dan Space Project, Inc., Project Matters, City Lore, Brooklyn Historical Society, now the Center for Brooklyn History at Brooklyn Public Library, and the Weeksville Heritage Center. Please join me in a round of applause welcoming Dr. Kanakamedala.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to be here and just so honored. I usually start these talks, or these sort of conversations, as I like to call them, by giving thanks and showing gratitude. So thank you so much to Elias, to Jamila, and to Professor Brathwaite for inviting me to give tonight's keynote. And to just spend a little time with all of you. So thank you to all of you. I know evenings are hard. At the beginning of this, when we were doing tech, I was saying my partner was dragging my 7-year-old into the bedroom so he would keep quiet during this thing. So I appreciate evenings are not the easiest for everyone. So I do so appreciate folks showing up tonight just to spend a few minutes with us. What I wanted to do with the next sort of 20 minutes is not just talk at you, but to actually unpack and really break down how public history projects happen here in New York City, how a book like Brooklynites comes to be, who all the collaborators and funders, and there were many, many funders, are, and to actually think collectively and practically about how we do this work, right? As folks who really are committed to not just telling this history, but also sharing this history as being memory workers. A model that I love are my colleagues out of Weeksville Heritage Center, who consider themselves stewards of the original 19th century African-American community that lived there. So to think about different models and how we really do this history, especially at a time when politically this kind of history, our histories, our collective histories, global histories are under attack. And also at a time when the kind of funding that used to be available to do this kind of work, memory work, is also rapidly disappearing. So moment of truth, I'm going to share my screen quite quickly, hopefully, and we will get started. Here we go. Fabulous. I hope everybody can see that screen. It should be a book cover that you're looking at. Excellent, thank you. It is my kids' hands holding up the book. And you are also seeing a number of logos. So by way of introduction, I'm clearly not from the United States, right? I did not grow up here. I grew up in Liverpool, England, another port city like New York. And when folks ask me, you know, why do you do the history of New York City? As a student, I think, of global histories, I always say our histories are intertwined. both as a Desi person, a person of South Asian descent, whose elders and ancestors would often tell stories of what the Empire and British Empire did to their own countries, and how our histories are intertwined. But also just as a person who really believes in port cities, right? Cities that brought all the peoples of the world together to do a sort of democratic experiment of what it looked like to live in really close quarters. And those histories, in my mind, whether you're talking about Brooklyn or whether you're talking about Anfield back in Liverpool, all did very similar things. And those similar things really are that they made obscene amounts of money in the 19th century off the labor of people of African descent through the traumatic system of slavery. And as a result, our cities, whether you're looking at downtown Manhattan or you're looking at the beautiful architecture of Liverpool or Bristol, they look gorgeous, right? Because that money created millions, if not billions of dollars or pounds. The other thing that port cities do, again, which are intertwined in my mind, are that they followed very similar sort of economic crashes. So whether you're thinking about who was holding these communities together in the 50s and 60s, and certainly by the 70s, the ways in which our own neighborhoods started to be forgotten about, whether that was intentionally through redlining, broken windows policing, something called urban renewal, or whether that was, in my case, growing up as a child of the late 70s, early 80s, where Thatcher literally just did not want and was not interested in a city like Liverpool, one of the most, I would say, Irish cities in Britain. And so what that did was, of course, the loss of waterfront jobs, the loss of union jobs, the increase in police brutality and police violence. What that did throughout the 80s and 90s, I think New York and Liverpool actually have very similar stories to tell. So New York has been my home for 2 decades. And the reasons I tell these stories is because as a young person growing up, I was taught about the slave trade. I was never taught about empire necessarily. But as a person, again, of South Asian descent, in my mind, I was always making those connections. What are our shared struggles? What are our shared joys? And how do we collectively lift each other up? And so another piece of history is how this book came to be. In 2000 and... Oh, it was the Bloomberg administration, so it was a while ago. While I was still finishing up my PhD, there was a remarkable woman called, and she's since passed, Mama Joy Chattel, who was a proud Brooklynite, lived in what today is called Abolitionist Place, but was then Duffield Street. And like everything else in Brooklyn in the early aughts, was being rapidly developed. And so Joy Chattel turned around to the city and said, my house was part of the Underground Railroad. And like everything else, they said, great, we will go investigate. Because of the African burial ground in Manhattan, and because of organizers who really did push forward sort of a model for how New York City does history, especially when there are either remains or when somebody says, you know, I think architecturally, my house is part of the Underground Railroad. There was a whole scholarly committee put together that looked into it. And sure enough, through maps and archives, letters, whatnot, they did figure out that this house was probably part of the Underground Railroad. Now, you know the end of this story. The city will still tear those houses down. So all of those neighbors' houses on Duffield Street have now gone, apart from the late Mama Joy Chattel's home, which has since been landmarked. As a result of a Black woman's activism, there was an RFP put out by the Bloomberg administration. And then fast forward to 2010, when I get involved in this project, and the project was going to be called In Pursuit of Freedom. It asked for several cultural organizations in Brooklyn to bid on this and to really tell, and I reject the model of untold stories, and you guys know this, with all the work you're doing, none of these stories are untold. Somebody somewhere, whether it is a descendant or a historian or an archivist or a memory worker, is always telling these stories. I think the emphasis is on whether we are listening well enough and carefully enough to really remember the stories, right? So they asked these cultural organizations to bid to put together this undertold story, as I like to frame it, of Brooklyn's not just free Black community, but the anti-slavery movement. Because at the time, and it doesn't happen anymore, when historians would say, I'm a historian of New York City, often what they really meant was they were a historian of Manhattan, right? The city of New York as it was back then. And then everybody else sort of got a look in as a shadow or a subchapter of that history. And so Brooklyn Historical Society, which is the first logo you see there, Weeksville Heritage Center, and Irondale Ensemble Project, which is a theater company, bid for this and said they were going to put together walking tours, K through 12 curricula. What else were they going to do? An original theater production, a website, exhibits, you name it. They were going to bring a team on to do it. Part of that team was the historian, which was me, a very early career scholar, newly minted PhD, who had worked extensively with theater companies around 19th century archives and race, but was kind of new to this institutional way of doing memory work. And so I really do owe this job in a way to Mama Joy Chattel and her activism. I also owe it to generations of Brooklynites who have been researching the history of 19th century Brooklyn long before, right? While I was still a child growing up in Liverpool, long before I came to the United States. I just want to make clear, because I think it is something that sometimes scholars and historians don't do, of the amount of funding and the sheer number that goes into building big public history projects, like the type that you see when you go to a museum or you take that walking tour, and it is embedded within a larger narrative of the city. You can clearly see here, we had the NEH in its old iteration, probably not anymore, something that would fund this kind of work. We had private organizations. We also had pardon me, Verizon, National Grid, Con Ed isn't on there. Really strange. Con Ed loves to finance or fund curricula. Strange connection. I've never quite figured it out, but they really do. If you ever look at the funding for several curricula, including the Black curriculum that is in New York City public schools right now, a big funder was Con Ed. So you had various like city council, city funding, federal funding, state funding, doing this work, right? This work doesn't happen out of anywhere. And so I'd mentioned that there were exhibits, K through 12 curricula, walking tours. The book, the thing that I am talking about a decade later, right? I first walked into an archive in April 2010, and that was at BHS. The organization doesn't even exist anymore. It is now Center for Brooklyn History, part of the library. Fast forward to September 2024, and that is when the book came out. So I think it is an acknowledgement, it's an invitation to think about these projects that you might be working on or these histories that you are trying to recover as being not just might take a few weeks or months or years, but might actually take decades, if not be generational, right? What you find in your generation, you will pass on, and the next generation will pick it up and keep going with it. Let me just go to the next slide. And so to just give you a quick overview of what this history was, the history, again, recovery work, right? I did not have to put together a story as such. I just had to make it neat enough for the average person to understand. And so all I did truly was say, we need two bookends. We're going to start the story at the end of the American Revolution, and we are going to finish it somewhere about the Civil War. What that did was be able to tell the story of not just these free Black communities that would build their borough, that were instrumental to the kind of urban planning, or not urban planning, sorry, urban building, community building work that I think still exists today and is still vital to the kind of life that we make for ourselves. But to also explain, at this time, Brooklyn was its own character. At the end of the American Revolution, what you're seeing here, just one of the many archival types that I used, maps. Brooklyn was just one of former 6 colonial towns in Kings County. It was tiny. It included the towns of Bushwick, Flatbush, Flatlands, Gravesend, New Utrecht, and then obviously Brooklyn. Our story at the begin, in terms of this history, would begin in that northwestern point. So I was really deliberate in thinking about storytelling and thinking about how do you invite audiences in, and thinking about multiple audiences, right? Thinking about audiences such as former Brooklynites who had been displaced from Brooklyn, but whose families still had deep roots in the borough. Thinking about folks who are just New York City nerds and love this kind of history. And also thinking about how do we tell young people this story so that it is not overwhelming, right? So that it doesn't feel like a book at them. So we begin this story in that northwestern point. Again, the focus is away from Manhattan, but just close enough, in this village of Brooklyn. And sure enough, in this village of Brooklyn lived a thriving free Black community. So use of maps, really easy way to start recovering history. Another way we recover history, of course, is because the 19th century, especially the early 19th century, when photography and certainly daguerreotypes is not so widely available, wasn't invented, especially in this time period, paintings, pardon me, paintings or images or engravings of what street scenes would have looked like. Because again, thinking about the archives of Rockland County, often what you're looking at, people are literally buried within the image. So this is a really famous painting of Brooklyn, Francis Guy's winter scene, who was painting just a scene of his local village. The village of Brooklyn sounds so quaint now when you think about Brooklyn. And of course, because he was true to what he was seeing, if you actually zoom in closely, which I won't do, or if you take a moment to sort of, if you Google it, you can see it clearly. There are so many scholars that have broken down who every person is in this image. And so what I'm really keen to sort of impart to people is Brooklyn was always a place in which space was limited, and that all the peoples of the world came together, some involuntarily, right? You have people of African descent here who are the descendants of enslaved people. And you also have free Black people within this image. You have former slaveholders in the image, and you have the descendants of the slaveholders. And if you look really carefully, there is a chimney sweep in there, in that sort of between the two chimneys in this gorgeous winter scene, who was well known to Brooklynites, right? He was a young person of African descent who was responsible for keeping all these houses sort of warm in this winter scene. So again, thinking about the archives that we do have and how we use them to be able to recover the stories of ordinary people. I've talked about maps, but of course, a huge part of memory work, and I'm sure so many of you are doing this in Rockland County, is walking the very streets that exist still. So I love to show this image because this was one of the original buildings that the Free Black community would build. It would become Bridge Street AWME Church, still exists today, is now moved to Bedford-Stuyvesant, and of course at this time was in downtown Brooklyn. And so the reason for putting the maps next to the photo is, and I say this, I'm a CUNY professor, I teach New Yorkers every day the history of the city. And what I invite folks to do, and I would invite anybody to do, is just look up, look around, look up, look at what you're seeing. Do you see old buildings? What are the history of those old buildings? Who are sort of the hopes and memories and the lives of the folks that we are walking over constantly? Because it is all buried deep in that soil, right? There is something so spiritual about the streets that we walk on. And so I just want to alert you to that triangle on that map. If you can see it, it says Front Street, Main Street, James Street. If you walk there today, it is the most charming place, apart from all the tourists. It's the foot of the stairs to the Brooklyn Bridge. We all love the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City. But that was actually the spot in which the majority of the free Black community lived in 19th century Brooklyn. So again, thinking about spaces that still exist, such as that building, but is now, overwhelmingly surrounded by condo buildings and office buildings. But if we look carefully enough, walking is a great way of recovering memory or recovering the lives of New Yorkers past. The other thing you can do, of course, is look at buildings that still exist. Bridge Street AWME, that image that you saw, is now owned by NYU, and it has changed function so many times. When I began the project, it was like the student center, and I think it has now gone back to being an engineering building. This might be a more familiar image to some of you. This was the disused Domino sugar factory. Today is going to become office space and condo buildings. But again, it tells a history of not necessarily the free Black community, but definitely tells a history of how, even as slavery was abolished in 1827 in New York State, Brooklyn and New York continued to profit from the labor of enslaved people of African descent. And so the Havemeyer family, which is what you see in this image, it's the Havemeyer factory on Brooklyn's waterfront, newly developed. Hard to think of that waterfront being undeveloped today, would eventually become Domino Sugar, again, a brand that we all know well. And the ways in which Brooklyn becomes the third largest city in the United States by 1861 is that it is very much tied to those, to the labor of enslaved people. So again, complicating our histories, right? Even as, for example, with me teaching people in a classroom, young people, that slavery was abolished in 1827, how do those legacies of slavery and injustice continue to exist even post-emancipation in New York City? And this is one of the most obvious ways. The ways in which Brooklyn is making its millions is through sugar. And where is sugar coming from? It's coming from places like Puerto Rico, like Louisiana, in which people are not free, and it was a brutal labor system. Another easy way in which we look for archives of elders and ancestors is, of course, the city directory or census records. Census records are not difficult to find anymore. They're just expensive. If you can find your library, New York Public Libraries, research libraries all offer access to ancestry.com. It's a really easy way to put in a name and start to find records of elders and ancestors. The city directories, especially for Brooklyn and New York, have all been digitized by wonderful colleagues in the library system. And so again, starting to recover stuff that is staring right in front of you. And that's why I do really call it recovery work. There is Mrs. J. Wilson. She is the wife of William J. Wilson. And she owns a crockery store. This is a Black woman, and that is indicated by the asterisk, who owned her own business, right? So challenging the historian or the researcher of the kinds of narratives we might have been told or taught of what life actually looked like in Brooklyn. She owns her own store, so she's a businesswoman, and she owns it on Atlantic Avenue, not as popular or as commercial as it is today. But here is a woman who has figured out, if I can buy and build a crockery store on this cute little street that looks like it's going to become something one day, I might make money. And sure enough, compared to her educator husband, I say this with love because my partner and I are both public educators, I suspect Mary Wilson was making significantly more money than her husband, William, right? She was the breadwinner. And so I just want to unpack, because I know I really do want to open it up to conversation and dialogue about the ways in which this knowledge dissemination and production happens. When you research this history, it does not have to look any one way. And I am really sort of keen to discuss what design of projects look like. This is the most sort of traditional, obvious way when we talk about public history, right? It goes into a museum or it becomes an exhibit of some kind. Here are some gorgeous New York City school kids that were brought in to the museum, and we're pulling on things and trying to learn about that history. But none of that history disappears just because the exhibit comes down tomorrow. And so what I wanted to do was sort of talk about the ways in which I started off with a really big public history project, which had tons of funding, tons of publicity, a whole well-oiled machine of archivists, educators, development people, myself, a whole slew of brilliant researchers. But how we tell these stories in much more manageable, budget-friendly ways. So back in 2018, I facilitated a workshop in which we went to Richmond Hill out in Queens, and we were really keen. I say we because I had the backing of the Center for the Humanities at the CUNY Graduate Center, sort of funding all of this work. We were really keen to, the best way I always think about it is connect and facilitate rather than create, right? Because it is not my sort of position to be creating anything. I'm not of Indo-Caribbean descent. I'm very much a guest at the table in those spaces. And so to think about the ways in which we could give resources to a community, broadly defined, who were already doing this kind of work, and think about how they share, record, and archive their own stories. And so because I was a faculty fellow at the time and I had some funding from the Mellon Foundation, we brought in Gayatri and Rajiv, who are from that neighborhood, grew up there, and are brilliant writers, to sort of talk about their work and, do a little bit of reading. And then Aliyah Ranjit Singh, who is now my colleague at Brooklyn College, came in, didn't grow up in Richmond Hill, but came in to talk about, and is very much a scholar of Indo-Caribbean peoples, to talk about Dougla, right? To talk about shared histories, especially in third spaces like the Caribbean, of people of African and South Asian descent. And what we wanted to do, because we had partnered with the South Asian American Digital Archive, who take what it means to be South Asian very broadly, was bring in a archivist that would be respectful of the space, be respectful of what they were doing there, never try to, I reject ideas and words such as empower communities. It's like communities are already empowered in doing this work. It is for us to simply connect and to facilitate where possible. So Maggie Schreiner, who you see on the very left here, is an incredibly gifted archivist, knows how to bring in that professional equipment to libraries. She's been doing it for decades, was working at Queen's Memory Project and Brooklyn Historical Society. So sure enough, brought in this gorgeous little sort of small scanner, but super powerful. Gayatri is the South Asian Digital Archive, and Rajiv asked folks to bring in photos. Have you got letters? Have you got stuff that you would like to scan and digitize? And I think the important part of that puzzle is never to say, so we can have them, right? Who is the we in that sort of positionality? But to actually think about, can we digitize them so that you can then pass them on to the next generation? And I think finding folks, kindred spirits, friends, colleagues, allies, who understand how this work needs to be done ethically, in a non-extractive way, is so important, especially right now where resources are scarce and there is no funding for anything. And so my last slide, and what I hope to sort of open with in terms of conversation, is there are so many people. I always call this a shout out page, right? There are so many people in New York City doing memory work, and doing memory work with a focus specifically on Black stories. And so I'm thinking here, and I put everybody in, huge shout out page, Queen's Memory Project, who are obviously focused on communities out in Queens County, New York City. You might have heard of StoryCorps, right? They're much more mainstream, have no particular focus, but will come in and do various sort of work. The Blacktivists, who I follow closely, are out in Chicago, and they will often interview elder members of the Black Panther Party and get their oral histories together. Archival work, I know this slide makes it look slightly skewed. Archivists and archival work, people will tell you, is still largely white. So trying to find folks who understand the ethics of it, who are maybe from the community, however you define community, or who understand what it means to be non-extractive, are few and far between. So these are some of my favorite people here in New York City. Eric Washington is a brilliant oral historian. If you want somebody to think about how you research the history of streets and then get them renamed, which is a huge thing here in New York City that we do, Eric Washington is the go-to person. He has been fighting for decades now to get what was called Colored School Number 4 in Manhattan, both landmarked, but also the street renamed. And so Eric Washington does streets, and he does buildings specifically. Cynthia Copeland, who you see here, again, another sort of valued colleague, and just so beloved by so many folks in New York City. If there are any stories that come out of Central Park about Seneca Village, it is absolutely Cynthia Copeland. And again, my CUNY colleague at City College, Herbert Senure, and two retired colleagues who did the work, right? They are the folks who really did push the Conservancy to think about what was here before Central Park was here. How do we honor those folks that lived here in Seneca Village? And Cynthia is doing such important work around descendant communities. So again, if you need to speak to somebody about how do we find descendants, or not need to find them necessarily, but how do we connect them to this history, and then what? What do we do once we do that? How do we preserve and honor these memories? Zakia Collier is a trained archivist, speaks beautifully about what it means to do memory work, archival work, is currently teaching at Queen's College and was sort of artist at the Laundromat Project. I would invite you to Google any of these people and just see the range of work that is happening. The idea being, and I say this in my graduate classes all the time, there is no need to feel like you need to reinvent the wheel. Often the best memory work that is happening is when you are in dialogue with other folks. And so Kamau, who is the founder of Black Gotham Experience, he does memory work through walking, right? He takes you on tours of Lower Manhattan to really uncover what New York was like in the 17th century. Or if you've got elders who you want to interview, sort of before memory goes or whatever it might be, there is something called the Black Oral Historian Network. Most of these folks, by the way, are on Instagram. If you're not an Instagram person, find somebody who is, because I find there is a bit of a generational divide, even with me, where I'm like, I don't really, follow folks through my personal account, but I'll follow them through a professional account. But some folks are really have their accounts wide open. And I would just invite you to think about what is the kind of work it is you're needing to do. Are you needing to recover a street, a building? Are you wanting to honor the dead through walking as a collective? Does it need to be that you are interviewing elders? In which case, do you need somebody from the Oral Historian Network? Are people already doing this kind of work? Meaning there's somebody behind the Kinfolk Tech Collective, super young people, much younger than myself. They're in their early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, doing brilliant archival work. And again, on Instagram, if you ever look, Nueva Yorkinos, there is, and I've forgotten their name and I feel so bad about that, but they're doing amazing work about collective archives and just community archives, saying to people, can you send your photos in from the early 80s? And we'll post them, and we're creating our own sort of informal archive. Again, if you're thinking about oral historians, Columbia's Oral History Masters of Arts program remains sort of the largest program in terms of training people. You can often find trained oral historians that will work with you there. And I've put this in kind of like a wah-wah because IMLS was gutted in the last year, but IMLS used to be, the Institute of Museum and Library Services used to be the premier place for any organization trying to do memory work to get even a small grant, 1,000, 2,000. And so it really does fall on us, I think, to figure out where that funding comes from, because it has all disappeared overnight, and to figure out how we collectively do that work. So on that note, speaking about community and collective, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would just love to open it up to dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kanakamedala. Just a reminder, you can feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I haven't seen any yet. I'm going to ask one opening question. And I'm in the hopes that people will still keep thinking of questions. I was struck as you were talking, right, and you were showing us the images about how well you see in a way, right? I mean, you look at a building and you see a history. You look at the map and you see a different kind of history. You look at the painting, you see a different kind of history. For those of us who, let's say, our vision is not so clear, right? You suggested that we begin to look, right? But let's say for those of us whose vision is not so clear, how can we begin to see the history around us or in our lives or that we're taking part in or what have you, right? How can we begin to see in the way that you are seeing history?
Thank you so much for that question. I don't know that I have a neat answer, to be honest. I think it is, it's a practice, right? It is something that you engage in a very sort of active way. So if you are new to maps, look, I didn't come out my mother's womb reading maps. Like, it is training and it is practice. So what I would absolutely recommend is work with, there are so many brilliant librarians and archivists that can teach you, here's a historic map, here's what you're looking for, and just pull those maps out. In terms of your senses, this is something I teach as a CUNY professor, and I'm always hopeful that my students by the end have got it. Be open to all your senses. Often, our ancestors and our elders and their memories of New Yorkers past are living in ways, if you are remotely spiritual, in which their stories are waiting to be told. So if there is an old building, go Google it. If you have any interest, which I feel like all of you will do in this organization, Google that building, find out sort of where it was, and then go and find the map, the 19th century map of that specific location. And often those maps tell stories that, again, are waiting to be recovered. I'm thinking of Mariam Kaba, who's a well-known abolitionist who says hope is a discipline. I would say all of that I'm talking about is also a discipline. Keep looking and seeing and hearing and thinking about what is it I'm not seeing that I should be looking at differently.
Thank you. That was really helpful and really reassuring to know that I could get better, or that any of us could get better. We have one question in the chat. What most surprised you about the families that you researched for the book Brooklynites?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking. I don't mean to sound like I'm rejecting the question, because I'm not. Nothing really surprised me about what I found out about those Brooklynites. My belief is always, I'm a social historian. I think ordinary people do extraordinary things all the time. And so I was very clear going into the archives that we were going to find the names of lots of people who have been forgotten in a kind of mainstream narrative, who were collectively building their city in ways that are really meaningful to us. And again, not surprising, but it was always clear to me that Black women would be at the center of this organizing, this center of urban building, of community building. And sure enough, again, there's something spiritual when you work with archives. There were plenty of archives of Black women, like a woman called Pomona Bryce, who was fundraising for her family. She was formerly enslaved. Her family had remained in slavery. And again, so I think challenging us in the present generation, the present time, to think about history just slightly differently.
Thank you. One more question in the chat, and I will flag again, right? Please do ask questions. We have time. We'd love to hear your questions and your voices. Another question from our chat. Other than the painting you shared with us, what interesting tidbits can you share with us about the histories of the free Black communities in Brooklyn?
Thank you so much for that question. Oh God, honestly, free Black communities in Brooklyn teach us so much about life today. I do an exercise in my classroom, and I'm sorry I'm talking about my classroom so much. We are in, Professor Brathwaite can tell you, we're in the midst of our CUNY semester. We have 2 weeks left, so I'm very much still in teaching mode. But when you ask young people, or you even think about what you want in your own lives, how do we build a neighborhood? How do we build a community? We all have the same answer. And honestly, I've been teaching at CUNY. This is my 13th year, and those answers have not changed. What do we want? We want an idea of access to green space or open space of some kind. We want the ability to access, affordable, healthy food, good schools, transportation, housing. And then, of course, we break down safety. What does safety look like? What safety looks like to me might not be what safety looks like to you, and so on, because of the history of what police brutality looks like. And so I do think there are ways in which this history has a continuum. So I find free Black communities fascinating in that here are a set of New Yorkers that had the same hopes and dreams as the rest of us have for our communities today, or our, the next generation, thinking about my kid and his friends. And And so, again, that ordinary act, what were they doing? Well, they were buying land cheaply in order to be able to vote, right? Because there was a restriction around voting in New York State at that time. And how were they buying land cheaply? They were moving further out of the city of Brooklyn. They were building their own schools and newspapers, businesses in order to sustain not just themselves, but think about the next generation. And I think all of those lessons are still relevant today. You know, we talk a lot, and Jamila said it so beautifully at the beginning, you know, this history is under attack. And what I always take sort of with full heart is this type of history has never not been under attack, right? Whether it was under a liberal government or not. This kind of history, I told you the story of the late Mama Joy Chattel has always been contested in different ways, whether that is around place and preserving place, or whether that is around the kind of content or the kind of lessons we can tell in our classrooms. It's always been under attack. So I think, again, Mariam Kaba's idea of hope as a discipline, you keep with the community, you community build, you find each other's kindred spirits, and you keep telling these stories. My peoples, in terms of South Asian culture, we came from an oral history culture like so many other cultures. And the way in which we keep that memory work alive is we keep passing those stories along and down to the next generation.
Thank you. One more question in the chat here. Were there, or to what degree were there 18th century Black Brooklynites involved in government or political organizing?
That is a great question. So, in the 18th century, this is when slavery would still have been legal in New York State. There are not many examples of that in terms of recovery from the archives. But what we do find is that the lives of enslaved people of African descent, really young people, 9-year-old girls, to older people like John Jay, and that's Jea. I'm not talking about John Jay, the white politician of New York, whose archives are much more preserved. It's always histories and stories of resistance, ordinary stories sometimes, right? I worked slower. I resisted by not doing the kind of labor that was asked of me. Or much braver stories. I ran away. I learned to read and write. These kinds of ordinary acts of freedom are sort of throughout the archives. So while I don't have a concrete example in the 18th century of a Brooklynite who maybe ran for official office in any way, again, thinking about or reframing what ordinary acts of resistance, of bravery, of hope looked like.
One follow-up in the chat. The person was also curious about the 19th century. Were there 19th century Black Brooklynites involved in government or political organizing?
Absolutely, right? By the 19th century, you have a growing free Black community who are savvy, who have figured out that this is a city on the rise. It is not yet the third largest city in the United States, who are grabbing capitalism to figure out how they can be part of the narrative and therefore shaping their neighborhoods. And so you have Black men specifically who are trying to both own businesses and also run schools like William J. Wilson. And you have Black women who are very central in these schools and organizing in ways I think that are often underappreciated, under sort of memorized in some ways, just under everything. So Black women thinking specifically about how do we tell the stories, again, to young people so that they grow up to be activists tomorrow. You also had somebody like James Pennington, who lived in Brooklyn in the 19th century, who would take on the ferry system. I know folks like to say we had our own Rosa Parks, and we absolutely did, Elizabeth Jennings in Manhattan, but Brooklyn had James Pennington, who took on segregation in the ferry system. So just, again, ordinary people, not necessarily the mayors of New York City or Brooklyn, but thinking through, I think, the kinds of rights that we really do, I wouldn't even say take for granted, but that we do sort of cherish still.
I know we're nearing time, but maybe I'm just going to ask one more follow-up on that because I'm struck, we moved from the 18th to the 19th, from, enslavement to abolition. Oh, there's another question in the chat. I'm going to ask this, then we'll ask one more, and then we are at time. But, moving from, enslavement to emancipation, I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit about, what sense you have about what freedom meant to Black Brooklynites, and also what meanings they gave to the word freedom in their, emancipated states.
Yeah, sure. So, again, Black Brooklynites, I think we're thinking in really ordinary ways that we still think of today. So I think I mentioned it before, so I apologize if it's a bit of a repetition, but thinking of freedom in the ordinary ways that I still dream about as a New Yorker, right? Where is my child going to school? Is my child safe? Am I safe when I walk down the road as a woman of color? Am I free in terms of the right to vote? And that struggle around the right to vote really did become the major political issue that they organized around. Am I able to own a business? If I own a business, am I able to dictate the kind of customers that come in and therefore avoid sort of daily episodes of racial violence that were thrown at me? I think Black Brooklynites were thinking about freedom in really meta ways, right? The big one, the Emancipation Proclamation, how do we end slavery in the United States? But they were also thinking about it in ways, I think, that are entirely human, and I think should still resonate today.
I have one question here, and it's a little different. What has the response been, both at the master's level and also at Bronx Community College, to New York history, and in terms of how are the students engaging with New York history? Because New York history is continually being written.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hear about the project from the 1980s with the photographs. That's not very long time ago. Where when you think of history, we're thinking like a century ago. Okay, so what is the response from the 18-year-olds and the 23-year-olds to this type of work?
Thank you so much for that question. So at the Graduate Center, I would say we definitely have more folks who are coming to New York City for graduate school. And so I think those classes for me as a New York historian are always a way to ground folks in the work that is already happening in New York City. Graduate school is its own particular beast. For those of you who've been to graduate school, you have lots of brilliant young people who are trying to figure out where their research fits in. And I borrow this from Black Studies. The best way to be a public scholar in this city is to always acknowledge the work that has come before you, right? To be in dialogue with people. My undergraduates, Professor Brathwaite, you probably know this from CUNY. They're all in the Bronx. They are very typical New Yorkers. And they could care less about the history of Brooklyn. They're just like, we're never leaving the Bronx. Please don't ever take us on that field trip to Brooklyn. You just tell us in this classroom and we're good. And teach us about the history of the Bronx because they're proud Bronx residents. So I think for me, what has made me a better educator and a better historian truly is CUNY students trying to figure out why a student who might never become a historian, right? They're taking my class as a requirement, should care about this history. Well, they should care about this history because this is a story of ordinary people, again, who had the kind of same hopes and dreams for themselves and for their future generations as hopefully they're thinking of it. And I think for young people, especially, as somebody who considers themselves very much middle-aged now, I think organizing, especially when you're working full-time, like the average community college student is, and doing elder care, childcare, and going to school full time, when you say, okay, and then become an activist and organize around your communities, collect your family memories, collect your neighborhood memories, feels really overwhelming. So again, figuring out how organizers lived in really ordinary ways in the 19th century, my hope is always that they connect with something, that activism and organizing often manifests itself in really ordinary ways. And I just want to shout out, because I've just noticed Debbie Ann Page is logged on tonight. Debbie Ann Page does incredible work out in Staten Island. So again, thinking about, yes, this history is under attack. Yes, we have lots of work to do. but also holding each other, I think, in hope and community, right? This work is happening constantly and will happen even tomorrow and next year and the next generation, because it's happening everywhere in New York City and outside of New York City in Rockland County. So just to hold on to that hope is what I hope people sort of end this tonight with.
Thank you so much. Jamila, I believe we're at time. Is that right? I feel like I'm seeing a nod. What's that gesture? Is that a yes?
I said ish.
Okay, yeah.
It,
Okay, yeah, yeah,
it,
yeah.
it actually means continue.
Okay. All right. Well, just wanted to flag. I know, there's one question from Jamila that we didn't get to ask, but you got a very heartfelt two thank yous in the chat that I just wanted to bring to your attention. Thank you so much again, both for the talk and for the Q&A. Please, another round of applause for Dr. Kanakamedala. And Jamila, I believe you have some closing remarks for us.
I do. If I can share my screen here, give me a second. I have something really important to tell everyone. Uh, I'm All righty. Well, thank you, everyone. Before I close, I'm just wanted to share a little bit of a save to date with you. I'm pleased to share that our 2026 Black History Month keynote will be held on Thursday, February 19th, 2026 at 7 p.m. It will also be on Zoom because it will be February in New York. Um, and we'll be featuring Dr. Jarvis R. Givens. Dr. Givens is a Harvard professor, and he has a forthcoming book entitled I'll Make Me a World, The 100-Year Journey of Black History Month. And that will be the centerpiece of our conversation. I must say that I'm truly excited to have Dr. Givens with us and to spend time. He has written many books over the years. One that really focuses on Carter G. Woodson fugitive pedagogy with Dr. Imani Perry, who was at the time was at Princeton University and now is at Harvard University. They've put together the Black Teacher Archives, and these are documents that probably very few people have ever seen. This is centered around Black teachers organizing during segregation. And so it's a treasure trove of information for you, for your students, for your family members to kind of dig into. And he'll be telling us about that as well. So look forward to receiving more information about that. We'll be getting our registration information out probably in early to mid-January, but just wanted you to put that on your calendars and remember to look out for it. Um, Also, I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Kanakamedala for joining us. I think I did it. Uh, really special having you here. Thank you for sharing your scholarship, your insight, and your deep commitment to preserving the histories of Black communities. Thank you to Dr. Rodriguez for guiding tonight's conversation and for your leadership as well. To our Board of Trustees, thank you for your steadfast service. And to everyone here tonight, thank you for your presence and your partnership. As we move into the holiday season and prepare to welcome the new year, let us remember that we must stand together to protect and preserve Black history. Our stories deserve accuracy, they deserve care and truth, and that requires all of us. Let us remain vigilant, ever committed, and ever connected. We wish you a wonderful holiday season and a joyful healthy new year. Thank you so much and good night.
Good night.
Good night and thank you.
Hello, Chris.
How you doing, Claude?
Good.
Hi, Jamila. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. Good seeing you. Have a good
I'm
evening.
pressing the stop recording button.